Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all the tips support. Appreciate it. So today we are very lucky to have Dr. Laura Taalman here. She's here all the way from the States, from Virginia. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We've just had another remote party join us, so hello to whoever's just joined us. I think it might be the group from Materials, so welcome. So today's talk is entitled Math by Design, 3D Printing for the Working Mathematician. To give you a little bit of background about Dr. Laura Taalman, so she's known as Math Girl on Thingiverse, is simultaneously a prolific maker and professor in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics at James Madison University in Virginia, USA. She's the founder of JMU 3Space and the first general education 3D printing classroom in the country. Obviously, that's in the States. She's the founder of JMU Maker Lab in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics and a faculty associate with JMU Innovation Services, through which she creates and implements curriculum around 3D printing and design. As a self-professed math geek, her 3D printing projects are inspired and informed by mathematics. Her original makes include a 3D printed snowflake generator that automatically designs unique snowflake models for 3D printing, a pentagonal tessellation 3D printed bracelet, and a 3D printed impossible screw, which could not be fabricated using anything but 3D printing. So without much further ado, I'd like to welcome you to Wits University and to Casting in Johannesburg, and hand over to you, and thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
So, as I sometimes do, I have since changed the title of my talk, but it's essentially the same type of talk. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm very excited to be in South Africa. I usually live in a very small town in Virginia, so this is very exciting. I come here with, let's see if this works, with two hats on. One hat, math professor at James Madison University, mathy things there, write textbooks, run 3D printing classrooms, that sort of thing. But in my other hat, my secret online hat, I'm known as Math Girl with 2 R's. If you're looking for me or if you're going to tweet something, you can stick that out there. And I've worked in New York City for 3D printing companies. I make a lot of models that are available online, and I write a lot of tutorials that help people start 3D printing when they haven't done so before. And my talk today is going to be kind of like that, but from a heavily technical math coding perspective. Okay, so if you're a beginner to 3D printing, that's fine. If you're an expert, that's fine too. Hopefully I'll do something new that you haven't seen before. And I'm going to start slow just by talking about what 3D printers are. So who's had experience with 3D printers already? If you can raise your hand. Okay, a few of you. That's fine. So to me, there's basically 3 types of 3D printers. So the first type, the type you might have at your home or in your office or at school, runs on a spool of plastic filament, and it prints, models kind of like this. The filament comes out of the spool into a hot end, which is basically like a glue gun, if you've ever used that. The glue gun hot end paints the first layer around the border and then fills in like a hatching inside, and then the build platform moves down a fraction of a millimeter and it makes the next layer, and it repeats that until you've grown a whole 3D printed object, layer by layer. Those are pretty affordable printers. The next one in the list is you could get this at a school or office. It's a little more expensive, and everything is turned upside down. The build platform now lowers into a vat of liquid, of resin, and a laser comes up through the liquid and fuses a layer of the resin, a very tiny layer, and the base moves up like a fraction of a millimeter, and it makes another one, and that keeps going until your model rises out of the liquid, like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Terminator when he rises. And that's very cool, very accurate. And then there's printers. The third type is like stuff I'm never going to own. Okay, so I'm never going to have a bio printer. I'm never going to have a printer that prints in titanium. But there are services where you can send your file away to this service, and they'll print your model in ceramics or in wax or in metal or whatever you're looking for, something that's very high-grade material. And so those printers aren't unavailable. You just might have to mail out to them. You might find them, maybe you have some in your university engineering department. Sometimes you find these in the engineering department, but you can still access them. So since I'm very math flavored, the things that I make tend to be super mathy. So you might make something different, but I'm just going to run you through some of the things I like to make. Polyhedra that open and close, Wenger sponges, which is basically like a fractal, where you have a cube and you remove portions of the cube over and over again. I love printing those. If you've ever taught calculus before or taken calculus before, you know that when you're computing a volume of a solid of revolution and using the method of shells, it can be really hard to visualize what those shells are. And you as the professor or you as a student probably not that good at drawing that on the blackboard, right? It might be good to actually have a physical model. And so there's a physical model where the shells are actually taken apart. I'm kind of obsessed with tessellation, so I have a tessellation maker where you can print every kind of pentagonal tessellation. We actually now know mathematically that there are exactly 15 families of those. That was just proved this year, and I have a little program where you can print all of them. If you have that resin printer, you can print really tiny things at a very nice resolution. If you feel like it, you can turn your mathy things into jewelry, 3D print them and have them cast in metal, print stuff for your house. Some of these models you've seen I'm actually going to talk about in this talk. But what I really want to print, though, most of the time, and what I started out 3D printing is not, because when I'm wearing my research hat, I am not theorist, and I'm interested in knowing, say, if I take this knot and this knot, is there any way that I could transform the orange knot to the blue knot, right? If I could morph this knot, could I turn it into this knot or not? Okay, so that's the kind of question that I know that joke never gets old. That a knot theorist would ask, and so I wanted to print a bunch of confirmations of knots that fit in space a particular way. These ones on the screen are actually all the same knots. Those are all the trefoil knots, the simplest possible knot. But you can print more knots than that. For example, here's the first 15 simplest knots, and some students were in a class with me where they went through each type of knot, looked through the literature to find out what was interesting about that knot, and then created a 3D print, that's the colorful 3D print, that represented that property or type of knot that knot was. So this 3D printing has been useful to me even in sort of an undergraduate introduction to math research type class, and students to think about knot theory that way. So, okay, so since a lot of you are new to 3D printing, let me tell you how 3D printing works. So the popular conception of 3D printing is that you go and find something you want to print, and you send it to the printer, and then you make stuff. Right? And none of that is hard, right? The printer is made to do that, and it's not hard to find stuff online. Like if I went online and searched for knots, this is just on Thingiverse, so many knots that you could download. I mean, I put a lot of them there, but other people put them there too. There's hundreds of things that you could print that are like knots, and then you get your model, you send it to the printer, nothing bad happens to you, and you somehow get stuff. And when people have this conception of 3D printing, there's sometimes some pushback, like where is the educational value in having basically a 3D photocopier where you just replicate things from the internet? And the answer is, well, that's not what 3D printing is like at all. So really, 3D printing is about this step even before downloading some model, where you're actually creating that model, where somebody put those models on the internet, right? When you use a two-dimensional paper printer, you don't just print out other people's stuff that you found online, right? You make a document, a pie chart, whatever, right, using some software, and you send that to your printer, and then you have that stuff. We need to talk about how to make a 3D thing that the printer is going to understand to be able to print. And that's what this talk is going to be all about, is that first step. How do we use mathematics and code to create objects the 3D printer knows how to create? Okay? That's what we're going to talk about. Now, to be perfectly honest, this isn't really how 3D printing works either. It's a little more complicated than that, and because you're a very sophisticated audience, and will tell you all of the things that are actually happening when you do this. Okay? So really what's happening is a lot of files being passed back and forth, and I'm going to show you what they are in an example of just printing a cube. Okay? So first I have to make a cube. We'll go into this program later, but just for the moment, suffice it to say that I've typed cube and a cube has come out, and I've now designed a cube. I take that design, when I download it as an STL file, it's really a triangulated surface. That's what that bunny rabbit we saw was. Really, you're looking for a triangulated mesh around the surface of the object that you want to print. On a cube, that's very simple. And the STL file is literally just a list of the triangles. So it's a list of triples of numbers. Each triple of number defines a triangle, and the order in which those vertices are defined determines a normal vector, and that normal vector is actually also computed and put right in the file. Okay? So the file is recording every triangle in your model and which way is out. Okay? That's all that the STL file is. In fact, this is the entire STL file for the cube, because that model was so simple and only had this many triangles. You take that STL file and you have to send it to the printer. So this Cura is the slicing software for the printer that I was using. I was using an Ultimaker. The printer does not want a triangular mesh, despite the fact that that's the kind of file you have to make. The printer actually wants to know what to do on every layer. And so the slicer translates that triangular mesh into instructions on how to paint around every layer and then how to hatch the inside. Notice the normal vector tells it which side is the inside and which side is the outside for that operation. And that machine code is G code that it exports. That's also actually a text file. And I've annotated it here myself so you can see what kind of instruction. It's things like move this distance, extrude plastic at this rate, change your acceleration, change the rate of change of your acceleration, stuff like that. And then you send that code to the 3D printer. That's what the 3D printer knows how to deal with, these physical instructions. And you wait, right? And the printer makes this little cube. And then you have cube at the end. And you could use it for anything that you want. So many things. I prefer a mathematical application of your cube. Now, of course, this is very silly, but we could make something cooler than a cube. We could make a mender sponge. I have one right here. I'll pass this around. Okay, so who knows what a mender sponge is already? All right, so we're basically going to take a cube. We're going to take out middle thirds, and then, oh, you raised your hand. That's good. You got you all beat right there. And then on like sort of the remaining subcubes, we also take out the middle thirds and repeat that infinitely many times until we have a fractal that has, let me get this right, infinite surface area and zero volume, which is crazy. We're actually going to do it 3 times, so we're not going to do it infinitely many times. So here's the first time. We put sort of a post through each of the 3 directions in the center. This is a program called Tinkercad, very easy to use. You group it to take those out. Do it again. Now I'm taking out the middle third portions of all the subcubes, take them out. Again, this is the last one I'm going to do, because you can imagine the 4th one would be pretty bad. Okay, so I'm not going to do it infinitely many times, or even 4, and take it out. That's the thing that's being handed around right now. Okay, that's the main cube. Here it is. If you print it, it prints better on a corner. If you've done 3D printing before, you know that overhangs are a problem. So if you print it on the corner, you don't have any overhangs, and you can just take that little stand off when you're done. There you go. That's what's being handed around right now. Now, who's familiar with writing code? Should be lots of you. Right. Those of you familiar with writing code know this is a dumb way to make a mender sponge, right? Like I'm running out of patience at level 3. Okay? Really, you want to do this with code. Okay? So the rest of my talk is going to be about how can we leverage things that we know about using code to create objects that we want to 3D print. So this is code that will make any level mender sponge, except the program will take a long time for n equals 4 and crash for 5 and above. So we didn't really gain a whole lot there. So let's talk about this program, openscad. It actually pairs openscad, and I've decided I don't care, and that I call it openscad. Okay? But if you talk to someone else, say openscad, they'll think you're smarter. Okay, so here's how openscad works. You type on the left, you press F5 to compile, and then a render appears on the right. Okay? So here I type sphere 20. I have to put a semicolon at the end. It means like, please go do this thing. You press F5, you have a sphere. Let's walk through what we can do to this sphere. First of all, this sphere looks like a disco ball, right? It is very hard edge. It's not a very nice sphere. You can add a parameter that controls the number of facets around the equator, and then now I have 100 facets around the equator, and it's a much nicer sphere. if I want to, I can put all the parameters up top and then call them in my code. As you know, this is a lot smarter. If I have a program that I have like pages and pages of code, I want to know my modifiable parameters right up on top so that I don't have to fiddle with my code every time I want to change some clearance or size of something. So here's me just separating the parameters from the code. If I want, I can make a module, like a function, that does some particular thing. In this case, this module does exactly the same thing that sphere does. So it's a pretty stupid module, right? But you get the idea, is that I could write a chunk of code that does something, and then I could repeat using it. So here I'm using the sphere twice. First, I use my sphere with a resolution of 24, so that's very faceted. And then here I have a translated sphere that's much smaller with a much finer resolution. Okay, so now I could have, again, just done this with the sphere command, but when you do something more sophisticated, you would have a more sophisticated module here. Now, in the Tinkercad example, I was removing stuff by like grouping holes with other things. In openscad, what happens is you use a Boolean operation, in this case difference. Difference always starts with the first object and then subtracts every subsequent object. Okay, so this is going to start with the big sphere and take away the little sphere, and you get this nice Death Star looking object that we could now export for 3D printing if we want. Okay. Now, openscad, frankly, does not get that much harder than this. It's a really simple declarative type language. Doesn't have anything weird about it. So even if you're new to code, this is a good place to start. And if you already like writing in various types of code, you probably find this frustrating that there's some things it cannot do. But you learn to work around this thing. I've written a tutorial about how to get started with openscad. I'm going to give you a link at the end of this talk that is a link to the talk itself. Okay, so the one link at the end will give you a link to this link and every other link in the talk. So don't worry about copying these down now. You'll have one at the end. But this is a little tutorial for getting started with openscad, and it comes with Google Drive, access to a Google Drive folder with a bunch of sample code. Because to me, the best way to learn code is to morph someone else's code or tweak it, and see what you can make. So it has these things. I'm going to run through a couple of these things that are in the sample code right now. First of all, I like knots. So I wanted to make, I can't believe I didn't bring one of these with me, a tritangentless trefoil. I'll tell you what that is in just a moment. So I need a way to make a curve in space, a closed curve in space like this. Okay? And if you notice, I have an equation for the curve right here. I have the parameters for the equation of that curve. And right here, the way that it's making the curve is with this really simple piece of code. This is all the code. It doesn't continue after this. It has this thing I've called tubify, which does literally the dumbest thing you could imagine. It takes the function, it samples the function at a certain value of t, then it samples it at a slightly larger value of t. It puts a sphere at both locations, and then takes the convex hull of the sphere, basically connects the dots. Okay? So it does this over and over. Convex hull is a very expensive operation calculationally. This is really dumb code, and it's really slow code. But it's understandable code, and it's really short. Okay? So that's a good place to start. When you feel more fancy, you can use what I call the sweeper code, which uses lots of math to keep track of sort of tangent vectors as the curve moves around. It actually constructs on the fly one polyhedron that traces out the entire curve by making sort of these prism segments one at a time, and then the math makes it all match up correctly at the end. It uses all this imported sort of math libraries, very fancy, very fast, very nice. It's very easy to make it smooth like this without having to wait for a long time. That's also in the sample code if you're interested. So if you want to make any curve in space, I have now just solved your problem. Okay, so somebody happened to come here today with that goal. Yay. Now it turns out that there is a knot, and this is what I can't believe I didn't bring, that no matter how you put it down on the table, it never touches the table in more than 2 places. It has no tritangent plane. It has no plane where the knot touches it tangently in 3 locations at once, not even through the knot, and they look like this. And they kind of roll around like an infinite rocking chair because there's no third point to ever sit down for these knots. So here's the code I used to make this tritangentless trefoil. The formula up there actually comes from that research paper that I showed you here. this research paper not only didn't have a 3D model attached to it to prove to you that the knot would have this property, it didn't even have a picture. Okay, it has equations to show this is a knot that has no tritangent planes, but it didn't even have a picture. It did, however, have the parametric equation for what that knot had to be like, and that meant that we could print this knot. Okay, so here it is printed. Oh, let me show you. That ball there is because what I'm actually making is an earring. So I'm interested in jewelry that looks like it would be impossible to put on, like this bracelet that clearly doesn't fit over my wrist. I'll show that to you later if you come up and ask me. But so this is something, you pull it apart from that little dot, and then you kind of roll it around your ear so the dot's at the bottom, and you push it back together, and people are like, how did that get on your face? And so that's a nice, and you can get this 3D printing and cast in silver, so it's printed in wax, and then actually cast with lost wax casting in silver. Here it is on ShapeJS. An interesting fact, the trefoil knot is chiral, which means this mirror image is not the same as the original, so I made a separate one for the other side in case I only have earrings on one side, but I understand some people have it on both. So that costs money. Please don't buy that. This is the free version. Everything I have free online, okay? So if you feel like buying a piece of jewelry, that's great, but you could also just download this knot for free and print it all day long however you want to, okay? I'm like the world's worst businesswoman, because so this is my spiel on digital entrepreneurship. I am selling things, please have it for free. Okay, so yeah, you may have a smarter way to handle that. But as an academic, I just can't help it. That's kind of how it works. Okay, so here's another thing. Another thing that's in the sample code is this code that generates snowflakes. Maybe I'll pass these around. I'm sorry I didn't have the trefoil knot to pass around for you. So these snowflakes are very different, but they're all made with the same code. And in fact, if you look closely, you'll see some of them look organic and some of them look precise. So the code can also do that. Okay, so here's a snowflake generated on openscad. I wanted to show you an example that was like highly non-trivial. So what this code does is it takes this seed. You see the numerical seed at the bottom there. It uses that seed to generate a sequence of random integers. And then it uses those sequences of random integers to decide what the snowflake will be like. So in real life, a snowflake is created, I'm not a scientist, so this is probably half correct. A snowflake is created as like this water droplet moves through air, and because of the wind and the temperature, it either makes these little tendrils or it makes these sort of plates, and they're long or fat or different depending on the weather and the air and the temperature. And so for me, the seed is doing that. The seed determines the sequence of random numbers that then determine how the snowflake grows. Okay? And it's kind of like Minecraft. If you ever played Minecraft, as soon as you're in your, I know you have played Minecraft. That's good. You can be a good designer. So if you ever played Minecraft, when you start a new Minecraft world, it's generated from one seed. The entire world is procedurally generated from one number. If you regenerated the world, it would regenerate the same from that one number, and it's kind of the same for this. Okay, so I'm not going to walk you through all of this code. I just want to show you some highlights. The parameters, the user can actually select things like how likely it is that the snowflake will turn out to be branchy, or how fuzzy the snowflake is, or my favorite one is how organic it is. Organic just messes it up. So instead of getting a perfect snowflake, all your dots like get moved around. So I have all these little wiggle parameters that sort of screw up your snowflake, because in real life you don't get a perfect snowflake, right? You get something that was windier on one side than the other. So here's the random sequences, and I said they're sequences of integers. I think that's actually a lie. Some of them are integers, and some of them are not. And then you're basically making these, hexagons and lines, right? You make some geometry. And then you have some algorithm that's like, okay, is the first step a branch or a plate? Then make that thing. Is the second step a branch or a plate? And what are you connecting to? And it goes through to build the snowflake. Oh, you can see the wiggles here. These wiggles, that's me unrotating from some previous wiggles. And then you can make, basically anything you want. Cookie cutters, ornaments, whatever you like. And you can make beautiful snowflakes for holiday season. You can print them for free at this model right here on Thingiverse. Everything I have is free on Thingiverse. If you click Open in Customizer, you'll be able to change those user parameters and randomly go through different seeds until you find the snowflake you like. Or you could download the openscad code and change it from right within the code. It's very user-friendly. If you want to, you don't have to see the code at all. Okay, so if anyone ever has any questions, please just stop and raise your hand. Okay, so that's openscad. I want to get sort of progressively more sophisticated with the tools that we can use. Okay, so if you're in the math department, you have probably access to Mathematica. It's very expensive. Almost everything else in this presentation is free software, so that you can use it. OpenSCAD is free, but Mathematica is definitely not free, but hopefully you could get access to it at the university. Mathematica can export things to STL format, but not everything. Most of the things it shows you is like a render, and it doesn't have a 3D model to export for you. I'm going to show you some really simple things that that are exportable successfully to STL. They're not going to look very exciting. It took me weeks to figure them out. Okay, so later, go look at that link at the end. This will tell you which things you can easily actually print out of Mathematica and have. Okay, so you can write like data, like when you're connecting for those knots. There's a couple ways you can make surfaces. Parametric plot 3D works. Contour plot 3D works. And by working, really, the key is that there's some kind of thickness parameter. You see that thickness up there, because your printer does not want to print things that are infinitely thin. Okay? That would be bad. The slicer would be very upset with you. So you can use that, contour plot. You can even use revolution plot 3D. And again, really the issue is there a thickness parameter? And does Mathematica actually have the ability to output this as an STL file? Or is it just showing you a picture of a 3D object? Even if you can rotate the object, it's possible that Mathematica is re-rendering the object as your mouse moves, so that you're actually seeing a very fast sequence of two-dimensional pictures of the object, and that won't be exportable. That's really the issue. Here's one of my favorites. I think I have one here. Here's a pentagonal hexacantahedron. That's one of the 13 Taalman solids. Mathematica, of course, knows what it is. The code for that is really simple. You just ask for it. The one I'm handing out is a wireframe. And I want to walk through just briefly how to make a wireframe out of this object right here. Okay, how to make this thing that's being handed around. Mathematica can do this. It can make a wireframe. This wireframe happens to be infinitely thin. So when you send it to the slicer and it says, what's the boundary of your object and the inside, there's no answer to that. Okay, and it's not going to be able to print that. It's possible to thicken that wireframe, but that is an example of something that's not really there. So that's just showing you a picture of what it would look like thickened. It has not actually constructed a three-dimensional object that's thickened. But if you write slightly fancier code, you can actually get it to be actually thickened. Unfortunately, the 3D output is really bad. You can see here on the vertices, you have all this bad geometry where open cylinders just sort of meet and there's gaps. And some people stick spheres in the gaps to close them up, which is just even more bad geometry and can really screw up when you're using your printer. So that's not so great. So I'm going to go back to where I was happy and had a pentagonal hexacantahedron that I could output, even though it wasn't a wireframe. I'm going to make the wireframe somewhere else. This is very common in 3D printing. You might use code. In this case, this is hardly code at all because this particular object is so simple in Mathematica. But then you might want to do something to it that you want to use a more designy program for. So in this case, I'm going to use a program called Taalman. This is topological mesh modeling software. This is sort of a playground for various mathematicians and computer scientists, computational geometers who want to try out like meshing algorithms. They made the software for that. It turns out it's sneakily a nice free device for working with meshes. Remember I said the STL file is triangulated? Well, that's why my pentagonal hexacantahedron is suddenly covered with triangles, right? Which is not going to be good if I take a wireframe of that. So the first thing I have to do is get rid of those extra lines. And then there's literally a button that looks like a wireframe up there. I think there's a button right there that looks like a wireframe. There's even a button that looks like a Menger sponge, believe it or not. So you can press it and see what that does to your object, which is crazy. Sometimes it works, sometimes it's not. But here's what the wireframe does. And that's pretty clunky, but I can, I'm not going to fix the clunkiness bit. I'm going to actually make this bracelet right here. This is a metal printed bracelet. I'll talk about that in a second. So I'm going to remove the top and the bottom of the shape because now I want to make a bracelet. And I'm going to remesh it. I want sort of a chunky and smooth at the same time look, so I added some more pieces to my mesh. And I did something called do-savin remeshing, which kind of smooths out the corners, but in a super clumpy way that I like. And then you get this beautiful bracelet, which looks better in the picture than in real life because it's really shiny when I first got it. It's very expensive. Please don't purchase that. That is for fancy models. So the company actually had this photograph with some fancy, beautiful models, which I thought was awesome. But then also you could just get it for free right here if you want and do whatever you want with it. That's just fine. That's going around right now. So this model right here, this was actually printed in wax, and then it was sent to India, where they did a lost wax casting in bronze, in this case, to make this. They can do that with silver. They do it with gold. They do it with, I think, platinum, gold-plated things, rhodium-plated things. But this company, ShapeJS, where I'm sending these prints to get printed for me, also 3D prints in stainless steel, like right in the steel. Okay, so there's like a powder that has somehow the steel in it, and also some kind of binding agent. 3D prints it, and I believe it is fired in some way, so that the binding agent comes out, and you're left with the steel object. I didn't bring one of those with me today. That's a lot cheaper than this process. But I will say just one more thing about digital entrepreneurship. If your goal was to sell jewelry online, companies like ShapeJS and also iMaterialize are a really good way to do this, because I have this model up here for sale. If anybody wants to purchase it, I get a small markup and I do nothing. The company makes it and sells it to them, right? So if you want to start a business making, say, cufflinks that are special and customized, you can make those, put them up online. If nobody buys them, it doesn't matter. You don't have any inventory. You don't have any overhead, right? You just make what you want and sell it. And if you really wanted to, you could try to make a business out of it, or you could just give it away. Okay. So Grasshopper. This is also, Grasshopper is free, but the program that you need to run this Grasshopper plugin is not. It's called Rhino. Okay. Now your school might have a license for Rhino, especially if you have a design department. You can also get an academic license, which is not that expensive. What I want to make is something, a better way to make a wireframe, and it's going to be a combination of the triacosoctahedron and a truncated cube. Okay? It's going to be sort of a combination of these two things called a joined truncated cube. The program Rhino knows how to make certain polyhedra, so I don't have to map out the vertices and connect them, which, believe me, if you can find a way to avoid it, you should. So I can ask Rhino just to make this thing for me. This looks suspiciously infinitely thin, okay? But at least has the data in the right place. Now here's the cool thing. This isn't code. This is an actual mouse drag and drop type design program. But it comes with a plugin called Grasshopper, where you make code by basically connecting elements with these little wires. And this does exactly the same thing that I did with the pentagonal hexaconahedron earlier. So this breadth is a boundary representation of the object. That's got all the vertex, edge, whatever data to the object. I feed the object into that. And then these wires is making the wireframe. Exo is a plugin from Exoskeleton that makes the wires and the nodes connect a particular way, and I can control various things about it with these sliders. Those are those sliders that go back and forth, and when I move them, the model actually changes on the Rhino side. And then Catmull Clark is just another kind of remeshing like the do-savin, and that's part of the Weaverbird plugin, which is also free. You put all these elements together, and you can do the same thing that you did in Taalman, but with this nice sort of visual programming version of code. And that makes that really pretty wireframe there, super delicate. Notice, see, things can be cheap. Okay, so things are cheap if you don't make them out of fancy stuff, right? So that, I think I have this, oh, it's right. I don't have that. That would be nice, wouldn't it? But I don't somehow. Okay, oh, you know why? Because I thought it would break in my suitcase. It's really fragile, so I didn't think it would make it. Here's a cool thing about it. If you notice that one that I showed you was only $13, here's the sort of internal workings of ShapeJS, where you can see that here the price is actually $25. Okay? And the price is determined by two things. So if you're making something, you need to know how to make it cheap, right? How do you make it as cheap as possible? It's two things, the machine volume and the machine space. Okay, so first of all, how much volume is in your object, like how much material is going to be used, literally. And the other thing is how much space does your model take up in the machine? Because when they print these things, they have these very sophisticated algorithms that pack hundreds and hundreds of models into like a rectangular cuboid area, and they print them all at once. And then people come in these like hazmat spacesuits and pull out stuff like it's in sand and shake them all out, and all these prints come out, hundreds and hundreds of prints from the same run. So they want to know how much of our machine are you going to take to print this thing. And here's the amazing thing. If you wanted to make this model cheaper, you might think, well, maybe I could just make it smaller, right? But it turns out, if I make this just a millimeter bigger, then it's less than half as expensive. Actually, this one I got down to $9.23. So I made it a tiny bit bigger. If you look, it went from 6.316 centimeters to 6.818. Actually, I changed it by half a millimeter. So what happened is the holes got big enough that Shapeways now thinks it can print inside. It'll take something like this and mush it up and print it inside, and then later it'll just shake it out and it'll print it both things, and you have free space inside. So weirdly, bigger things can be cheaper than smaller things. Keep that in mind if you're going to print. I highly recommend using a service like Shapeways and learning how to use it if you don't have access to a 3D printer. You shouldn't feel like you have to acquire or have access to a 3D printer to get started designing. Because, you know, for $10 you could make something cool and mail off and somebody will mail it back to you. You don't have to purchase the printer. You need to focus on the design. Okay, so here it is. Here's a slightly different one, a chamfered truncated icosahedron. I wanted to make these free Thingiverse, but these are not printable on the type of printers that print things like this. They're just too fine. So if that happens to you, there's a program called Blender that you can use to sort of thicken the object. Sometimes that causes some errors, and you can fix them with things like Make Printable, which is an online cloud service that will repair bad geometry in your mesh. I know I'm going through all this really fast, so my point is just to show you like what's possible. And if you really care, you can go look at the link later and follow those steps to do. Okay, so there it is on Thingiverse for free. Notice it's significantly thicker than the other one because that's what that kind of printer can make. Okay, so I love Grasshopper so much. Almost everything I make is made with OpenSCAD or Grasshopper right now. So I want to show you another Grasshopper example of taking, I had made this in OpenSCAD. It's a pentagonal tessellation. It turns out that PLA, what this type of printer uses, its melting point or its softening point is pretty much the temperature of tea, like boiling water, just less than boiling water. So if I dip this into boiling water, I can form it into a bracelet that fits my wrist exactly if I want to. But maybe I want it to already be formed, right? So in Grasshopper, there's a way to import a flat thing and wrap it around another thing, okay? It turns out that wrapping a thing around another thing is hard, actually. And I'm very unsuccessful in most programs, except for Grasshopper. And in fact, I wrote a tutorial about it at this link right here. If you, for some reason, showed up today wishing that you could wrap a thing around another thing and 3D print it, I have written a tutorial for you. It is right here, and it uses this code right there. I know that doesn't look like code, but that's how Grasshopper is. It uses this code. Each of those little modules, you can click on them and open up, and there's parameters that you can set and things like that. And it's very, even if you've never programmed before, it's not that hard to do. So you can import any flat thing and rotate it around some other thing. So for example, here it is printed in metal for an unreasonable amount of money. You can also print it in with the new HP Fusion Jet printer for a lot less money. I have that model right here. Or, of course, you can print it for free, flat, and get a cup of tea, or maybe don't put the tea in it, and then wrap it around your wrist to make the change. By the way, so this is, I think, a type 11 tessellation. For those of you that aren't following every piece of news about pentagonal tessellation, I want you to know that there's only 15 ways, 15 different families that you can take a regular pentagon and arrange them in such a way that it fills the plane exactly. Just this year, it was proved that 15 is the only number, that's all of them. 2 years prior to that, the 15th was discovered. That's how current this is, okay? So this is cool stuff that math stuff that you can wear if that's your thing. So in this case, I started with a flat thing, imported it into Grasshopper, and only had wrapping code, okay? But what if I want to make the whole thing from the ground up in Grasshopper? Let me just run through that again, just as an overview. I could construct the pentagon itself. It's hard to see, but there's a green pentagon here. And that right there is the code for the 5 vertices of that pentagon. Okay, so it relies on some trigonometry. You figure out what the vertices are. You can put in the information there. So it basically makes 5 points and connects them. And then this takes 4 copies of that code. So that code has now been squished into the pentagon module. And now you put 4 of them together. And then I'm going to take all that code and squish it down into something that I repeat in a string a certain amount of times. And then I can define like an ellipse at the size I want, wrap it around, and now I can really control the mesh. I can control everything about how the mesh looks and how the sort of style of it is. And I can even, believe it or not, if you get into Grasshopper, it gets very complicated, sophisticated. See where it says group fitness match here. This is actually using a genomic algorithm to set, like I have to set of 4 parameters that are wiggly, like how many pentagons are there, or how are they arranged, or how are they turned. And then I have some fixed parameters like how big is your wrist, right? That's not going to change. And so it'll take the parameter like how big your wrist is, and it'll like try different mutations of these parameters over and over again, and then find sort of a local best option based on what you want the outcome to be. And that's all part of Grasshopper. You can get these nice modules that do that so that it just lines up perfectly at the back. It's really nice. I highly recommend looking at Grasshopper. Oh, the DTB kids. So structure sense, couldn't bring this model with me because it's made of porcelain. You'll see why when you see this picture. There's no way it would have survived this trip, I don't think. It looks like this. Okay, so this is a tentacle bowl. Each tentacle is made out of a bunch of spheres that at each step in this program, the spheres get translated and then rotated in space and scaled, right? And that repeats. And if you look, that's what these rules are. The rules take a sphere and tell it how much to shift, how much to rotate, and how much to scale. That's what rule 1 is, rule R1. If you look, I've actually defined rule R1 6 times, 6 different times with different weights. I don't know if you can see that, but I've got rule R1 with weight 5, rule R1 with weight 1, weight 1, weight 60, weight 1, weight 1. So if I run, there's a 2. If I run this program, what happens is it picks one of these rules according to the amount of weight that I gave it, right? And this enables me to make just a little bit of tweak in the tentacle. So the tentacles all come out different, right? Just a little. But they all still have that same basic shape, but they're a little bit tweaked because the code in structure sense is specifically designed to be able to do this kind of, it's a really sneaky way to get organic elements into your code. And structure sense just does it automatically. It's basically what it's for. So structure sense can make some really beautiful things. So I wanted to make this tentacle bowl. It makes basically 20 similar but not identical tentacles. I'm going to print it in porcelain, which if you've ever like fired something in a kiln and then glazed it, you know that the bottom doesn't get glazed. Like whatever touches the bottom, the floor doesn't get glazed. So it's common to sort of raise the base so the glaze can get in that part. Okay, so you can do that in a software called Mesh Mixer. The internal geometry on this model is nuts. I mean, it's spheres that just are attached to other spheres. There's all this internal geometry. Make Printable solve this problem for me. That's free if you only do 3 repairs a month. If you do more than that, you have to pay. But it's free if you space it out. As it was, this is how many triangles there were. There's so many, we can't even see them. Okay, they're very tiny. The company ShapeJS that I send this to, I think the limit is 1 million triangles, 1 million faces. This had 1.2 million when I was done. So this program called Mesh Lab You can do some quadrant edge collapse decimation, which I swear is going to be the name of my next band. It's just such a great name. You can do that. It basically cuts the number of triangles in half, but doesn't change the shape of your model. Okay? So after that, you can send it to ShapeJS. Here, ShapeJS is telling me all the little ends on your model are too delicate, and we refuse to print this for you. In which case, I had to go back and fix it to make the ends a little thicker. And there you go. You get this beautiful bowl for holding, I don't know, whatever jewelry that you're making. And then there's free version, of course, on Thingiverse if you want to print it out. I should have brought that one. Okay, last one. So if there's any JavaScript fans in the audience, you might like this program called ShapeJS, which is actually internal to ShapeJS, that I discovered because I was setting so many things to ShapeJS, that they have this code that is based on distance functions and voxel geometry. And it means that some things that are really hard to make in other programs are really easy to make in ShapeJS. For example, just this code right here makes that gyroid. This little amount of code makes that sophisticated gyroid, and in fact, makes it with slidable parameters where you can change the period and the thickness of the gyroid. Okay? It's kind of a really natural object to make in that space. I can even cover another model, there's the tritangular trefoil, with the gyroid if I want to have like a gyroid texture to something. I don't encounter that need pretty much ever, but you can if you want to with ShapeJS. You can also do things like do an inset and an outset of your model. This is called the beefy bunny. It's something that was out of Thingiverse a lot about 5 years ago. Someone added some beefy arms to bunny. You can even have code that morphs one shape into another shape. So here a cube is being morphed into a torus. That is literally all of the code that's required. Okay, ShapeJS is a weird program. You can do weird things in it. This I found very challenging. That required a lot of code and 3 of us to make a pentagon. Okay, so go use openscad if you want to make a pentagon instead of the other things. All right, so let me finish with some references. I write a lot of tutorials about how to get started in different types of software. These are all written from the perspective of you not knowing anything about this software or 3D design at all when you start. Notice that you can't see the links. They're just things to click on. That's because I'm going to give you the link at the end where you're going to get the link to the slides themselves, and then you can just go click on these things. Here's another 10. I write a lot of these. So see, structure synth is in there. Grasshopper is in there. Blender is in there. If you want to learn about any of these programs that I've been telling you about. If you need to find me or want to know what I'm up to, my website is mathgirl.com. Notice there's 2 R's and no I's. I have a blog there called Hacktastic where I write about some of the things that I make. I write a column for ShapeJS now, which is great because then I can get some credit to print models of ShapeJS because it gets expensive. But a lot of those tutorials are actually linked to the stuff I wrote in this column. There's stuff I sell on ShapeJS. Here's all the stuff for free on Thingiverse, right? I got hundreds of models there that you can download and print, and a lot of times I put the code or the design file in there too, so that you can just modify my code or open it up in Rhino or whatever you need to do to remix it. That's really important in the 3D printing community is to share, allow other people to remix your stuff. And then when you remix other people's stuff, you say, oh, I got this object from so-and-so and I remixed it. Like, for example, this thing here, I didn't actually make this screw. Someone else did that. I made it so that you could print it in color on a different type of printer that prints in color. And I made it so that it spins right on that printer and prints in color on that printer. So when I post this online, every time I post it, it says, this is so-and-so's model. I have only modified this much of the model. So usually I make my own stuff, but this one was so cool I couldn't resist. That's very cool. Research-wise, I work with a person named John Bowers in the computer science department at JMU. We have students that work on circle packings and spatial graphs. Like, for example, we had a student who made these cool graphs of generalized Peterson graphs that get like different simple ways that you can realize those in 3D. And there's one of Dr. Bowers' circle packing. I have a small version of that hiding over here. And I brought for you all presents. I brought you all rhombic dodecahedra. So please choose whatever color is your favorite color from the bag. These have a great property. This is also one of the 13 Catalan solids, like the pentagonal hexacotahedron. They have a great property that they fill space. They tessellate 3 space. So if a lot of you got together, you could put them together like this in a little stack, and you would see that they actually stack up. Oh, that's it. Thank you, and thank you especially to the embassy for making it possible for me to come here today. So I think I left some time for questions. I think we have a lot of time for questions. Actually, I forgot to mention, I also have some slides about the 3D printing classroom that we put together at JMU that I can show later if somebody's interested in that after these questions. So, and I'll stay out of the way so you can see this link. That is the one link that you need, right there. If you take a picture of anything, that's the one. And I will give you these actual slides so that you can get to every other link in the presentation. Play the presentation for yourself. Okay. Oh, I see some questions. Yes, go ahead.
So I see that 3D printers give you the ability to print very complicated shapes. And I'm wondering if there's any math that explores the differences in strength and weight that you can get by texturing the volume of a 3D printer as a new field or uses old
That is a new field. Yeah, people are. I don't do that, but people do this, and especially with the infill of the object. So inside the object, it's not printed solid because that'd be a waste of plastic. There's usually some kind of hatching or crisscross inside or hexagons. But people have different ways of, like my colleague Dr. Bowers, he's worked on circle pack, like sphere packing inside. So you can strengthen up part of a model based on a certain packing. You can print infill more densely in some places than others. And there's some 3D software that actually lets you test the strength of your model under different forces before you print it, so that you can see what you might need to shore up. So I'm sure that in the engineering department, people think about this very important question of changing the actual sort of material densities for stability, for strength. Yeah, I think so.
I'm from the engineering department.
Yay! Okay, you have that?
No, we're not doing that yet. But what I want to ask is, on the meshing and your tentacle fold, for example,
yeah.
I know that they've now started developing, because of the fact that CAD packages generally don't produce good topologies. They
right.
Jaffy.
Right. Yeah.
One of the packages that we use for computational mechanics actually uses something that they refer to as kind of like a shrink wrapper to produce a clean topology for meshing. Is there any, because I don't know, when you were cleaning up the inside of those spheres, would it not have been easier to have taken an approach like that from the outside where you shrink wrap?
You can. So Mesh Mixer has that. So Mesh Mixer is the one where I cut the inset out of the base.
Yeah.
It has a tool called Make Solid. So that's not a great name, but what Make Solid actually does, I believe, is create a completely new point mesh around the object.
Okay.
Based on where the object is. And I think Mesh Lab can also do it, although I've never figured out how. But Mesh Mixer is not really good for computationally intensive things. It'll hang or crash, or you won't be able to get the resolution fine enough. For me, Make Printable, if I send something to Make Printable, it means I couldn't figure it out. It means I actually already tried to do that in Mesh Mixer or whatever, and then Make Printable is I know that anything I send to it, it is going to make a nice mesh for me out of it. I get to do that 3 times a month, right? So 3 times a month I give up and send my model to Make Printable.
Yeah, because I understand it's some sort of a proprietary algorithm, but they say it's
I'm sure.
Like the physical shrink wrapping, right?
I'm sure.
Surface.
Yeah, and so that thing happens in many different softwares, but that professional software probably has a fantastic and proprietary way of doing that, and for all I know, that's what they're using at Make Printable, right? I don't know, but you're right. I can't tell you how often I wish that instead of using the mesh I was giving it, it would just read the shape I was giving it and making a mesh that was nice. Yeah, I agree.
Sounds like you could give it to a PhD student.
I think that you could, and then give the program to me so that I can return my model. Yeah, please do that. Other questions? Anything else? Yeah.
The website addresses that you had up just now.
Uh-huh.
The website addresses, could you put them back up again?
Oh, yeah. Which one? Which slide were you looking for?
Last one you were showing this one was called Begin CAD or something like that.
Oh, openscad?
That one. Yeah.
Oh, this. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, do you want to see the one that's about this one here? Yeah. Now again, if you click on these, let me just show you. If I click on one of these, so like openscad, I think this one goes to a ShapeJS one, theoretically. Yeah. You see, it'll show you how to make various things, how to get started. It shows you an introductory video. In this case, I actually made this video. Usually I'm showing someone else's video, but I happen to make this one. This will teach you how to use openscad. It's actually 7 minutes, but totally a lie. And then there's some examples of things you can make with openscad. So that's the kind of thing that's at those links. It's not like a full course or something. It's more, what happens is it's not that there's not information on the internet, it's that there's too much information on the internet. So if you want to learn about openscad and you try to Google it, there's so much information that as a beginner you don't even know where to start. So what these links are is I've said, okay, just settle down, just do these 3 things, and then you'll at least have started, and then you know sort of how to get started. I'm going to put this back to that last slide though.